We have a great session now, and I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Senator Joni Ernst, whose career is defined by public service. After graduating from Iowa State, she joined the U.S. Army Reserves, ultimately retiring as a lieutenant colonel in the Iowa Army National Guard after 23 years of military service. In her home county, she served as the Montgomery County Auditor, where she worked to eliminate wasteful government spending and protect taxpayers' hard-earned dollars. As a state senator, she fought to balance the state budget. Certainly, these are very relevant experiences, especially in Washington today. Now, in November of 2014, Joni Ernst was elected as the first woman to serve in federal elected office from the state of Iowa and became the first female combat veteran elected to serve in the United States Senate. Over the past decade, she has become one of the most respected, thoughtful, and principled voices on national defense. And today, she serves in the majority on the Senate Armed Services Committee, where she chairs the Emerging Threats and Capabilities Committee. Senator Ernst, it is really great to have you back at the Ronald Reagan Institute and Foundation. Thank you. Now, today we also welcome one of the most influential voices from the private sector, who also brings a unique understanding of emerging threats and capabilities, our very own Reagan Foundation trustee, Mr. Joe Lonsdale. Many of you know him as a co-founder of Palantir Technologies and 8VC, among his many successful endeavors. Among these, Joe has founded over a dozen prominent companies, and he's been an early investor in several more. Here to moderate a discussion among these leading national security voices from the public and private sectors is Morgan Brennan, co-anchor of CNBC's Closing Bell Overtime. Ms. Brennan joined CNBC in 2013 and continues to cover a variety of sectors, including manufacturing, defense, and space. And speaking of which, she's also host of the CNBC podcast, Manifest Space. Morgan has interviewed billionaires, heads of state, thought leaders, and chief executives of multi-billion-dollar corporations, and the conversation on stage certainly promises to be fascinating. So please join me in giving a very warm welcome to our esteemed guests.
And I'll just say before we get started here that in the last maybe 5 minutes or so of this conversation, I'll open up to questions. So we will make sure to get to the room. But yes, there's so much to get to. And I actually think the last panel discussion was a really great way to sort of set the stage here, because I know they touched on some of these topics, but it does feel like this, and maybe I say this as a mature millennial, the first time in my lifetime where the world is opening up, or I guess the country is opening up in a way, the intersection of investment, the intersection of technology and entrepreneurship, and the intersection of policy for everything to sort of align and perhaps to see some real meaningful reforms, changes, and thoughtful ways in terms of how we are equipping warfighters and how we are thinking about things like government efficiency. So I guess from that sort of big place, tentpole place, maybe we just start there and I get both of your thoughts. And Senator Ernst, I'll start with you about this moment we're in and what it means for someone such as yourself, a policymaker, to seize that moment.
Absolutely. Thank you, Morgan, and thank you, Joe, as well, for being on the panel, and to the Ronald Reagan Institute. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here and talk about these issues. And I just told Joe out in the hallway, every day on Capitol Hill is like a new adventure. I mean, truly, every single day is another opportunity to find ways to excel. And this moment in time in particular is very moving for me, because I came into the United States Senate wanting to make Washington, D.C. squeal. My first campaign ad was "Make 'em squeal." And so every month, the past 10 years, I have worked on waste, fraud, and abuse in the federal government and solutions on how to correct that. But that was 10 years of work on legislation and letters and committee hearings that went really nowhere. And finally, we have a president right now with President Trump and with Doge and Elon Musk, who have given us a platform to execute what we have worked so hard on. So I think it's an extraordinary moment in time, and I'm so glad to be part of this movement to right-size our federal government, grab a hold of technology, move forward with bright young minds that are focused on innovation to make the commercial space better, as well as our federal government.
You're working on Doge with Elon Musk.
Well, I have a lot of friends involved. We really appreciate the senator's support and what you guys are doing from Congress there. You know, yeah, I think 15 years ago I started my first nonprofit was about all the waste we can find in California, which is, it turns out there's also a lot here as well in terms of ways we're not spending money very well. And it was very frustrating, by the way, in California because you'd uncover it and everyone would kind of agree and then nothing would happen because, of course, the people in charge didn't want to fix it. And you know, listen, I've worked in defense, obviously, with Palantir and now a bunch of other companies for the last 21 years. This week we raised, I think today we're announcing a $250 million raise into Epirus. Last week, I think we announced $600 million raise into Saronic to build. This is a great time to be building because, you know, really Palantir and SpaceX proved that the outside companies could outperform, it could be better, and now there's this culture of people coming in that we're going to fix things. But I think even more than all this new technology that's going to change warfighting, there's finally like an ability to be confident enough to make the cuts, and then when they squeal, like not just like back down. I think the way Washington D.C. has worked in my lifetime of coming here, I've been coming here for business for over 20 years, is you'll find things that are wrong, you'll agree they're wrong, and then they'll like kind of make a lot of noise and they'll get away with still doing it the wrong way. And like there are unquestionably hundreds of thousands of civilians extra that we don't need in the DoD. And like everyone agrees, this confident civilians will tell you we don't need everyone there. And like when we were trying to do tests for our new technologies that everyone agrees are the best, you'll literally have like 20 civilian.mil addresses like with the crazy objections that are like unnecessary. It's like this like just extra layer of nonsense and bureaucracy. And we have a lot of leaders in DC who've known for a long time this is the thing that changed, but they haven't really had the mandate. They've been afraid to push and cut. And so it's really exciting to have a time when you say, sorry, I know it's a little bit tough, but we're actually going to push. We're actually going to cut these things that don't make sense. And that it's really exciting for me to finally see that. It's a unique moment in time.
You're on the Doge caucus. Do we start to see this actually come into law? Does it get tucked into the budget at some point?
Well, we certainly hope so. So I founded the Senate Doge Caucus, sat down with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy in November following the elections, ran through all of the proposals that we had for them and decided let's bring in our Senate members. They started a House Doge Caucus as well. So the thought is that when Doge sunsets next July 2026, that it needs to be a lasting movement. Therefore, the Senate caucus, the House caucus, and ways that we can take legislation and continue pushing for these issues. But what we have on the committee, people from the Appropriations Committee, people from the authorizing committees, the Budget Committee, they all serve on Doge. They're all interested in this. We recognize we're at a tipping point in the federal government. We've got to make substantial change now and make sure it doesn't lapse in the future. So we've got to continue this push. Now, the question is, how do we get the legislation enacted? How do we continue with that when we have people that are so adamantly fighting against it, mostly on the left, some on the right? So if you're passing policy change, you have to have 60 votes in the Senate. That's always going to be a struggle. So the best way is to look at reconciliation, to look at the spending bills. How do we tuck our efforts into those particular pieces of moving legislation to make sure that it is more permanent?
Why do you think people are fighting it so much?
Well, I find that those that are really fighting it are those that have been feeding at the trough for a very long time. So people get really, really comfortable with the way it is. They are afraid of the way it can be. If we scale back and we find that we don't need all of these extra federal government workers, you've got all these constituents that are really unhappy because they've lost their jobs. If you find that you can go to SpaceX or you can go to Palantir or you can go to any number of these private companies and they can be much more efficient than the federal government, again, you have no need for these big federal government programs. There is a fear that surrounds that. It's a different way of thinking, and we've got to get used to a different way of thinking. Our bureaucracy is so bloated right now, and we can no longer afford to support a bloated bureaucracy. We have got to downscale. We've got to get back to a more efficient federal government.
I want to get your thoughts on this, Joe, because you are co-founder at, and if I look at, I'll just stick to defense specifically, co-founder at Palantir, which was, to your point, an outsider that had to sort of forge the way for others to come in this new defense tech landscape. You funded a number of companies as well. Anduril, Saronic, you mentioned, Epirus. You just closed another fund yesterday. I sort of see you as one of the godfathers of defense tech investing in this new era. You can do more with less, arguably, with some of these new business models. But what does it also mean for workforce, and what does it also mean for investment in parts of the country?
Yeah, well, I mean, the way a lot of things kind of evolved the last 60 years in bureaucracy here is they cared a lot more about the process than about the results. And there's been a lot of, frankly, a lack of courage in terms of fixing the things that are obviously broken. So I'm meeting with my friends who are running the Navy yesterday and going over stuff, and it's very obvious what happened with a lot of these things. And President Trump keeps asking them, why are my ships rusty? And they're like, what is going on here? This is a mess, and why is it so expensive? And you know what happened is that you had actually some really great firms, for example, running the maintenance and working on the ships for a very long time. And what happened is over the years, private equity firms would buy these things, and the people running the Navy did not hold them to the same high standards. So they kept cutting the costs, making more and more money off of it in order to, and not being pushed back on by the people in charge. And so you had a lot of this stuff that's like kind of decayed over the last 30 years because the incentives have been misaligned. There's not been the courage to say what is the actual best result. And so Epirus just raised this giant round today. I started this several years ago. It's the best technology with EMP to shoot down lots of drones, right? And it's really key for our country, for all the stuff we're facing. Is you can turn off bad guys, miles away. And just as an example, when you started the company, we went out to the desert. We broke into this contest. You're not supposed to be able to get in if like L3 and Raytheon and Northrop and all the big guys are there because they've got billions of dollars of contracts, and you're like the little kid and they're laughing at you. But we forced our way into the contest, and then for the same size, same power, we shot down the hardened drones 9.5 times farther away, and just completely cleaned the floor, like by far the best technology there. And then the other guys all got much larger contracts, and I went at the time, talked to the four-star running the Air Force at the time, and he's like, it's obvious you guys are the best technology, but this was written 2.5 years ago, and the process is such that if I were to like change the result right now, it would be break a lot of glass, it'd cause a lot of political trouble for me. So you guys probably can win 3 years from now, but you can't win now. And so it's like people care more about not the right answer, not what the best technology is, but these like systems they've put in place for the big companies to capture these things and lock them down and protect them. And I think that energy is finally changing. It's finally about what is best for America, what is best for the warfighters, what is most efficient, not how to protect the system.
So what does
Absolutely.
So what does that mean in terms of acquisition reform? What can be done?
Well, this is a bipartisan issue. I am happy to say that because so many of us are interested in making sure that we can get the latest and greatest technology out to the war fighter as fast as possible. And we talk about the war fighter, but there's technologies as well that are already proven within DoD. If you look at artificial intelligence and preventative maintenance, moving into predictive maintenance, we can save billions of dollars. The Navy has already proven that. So wrapping new technology as quickly as possible into the fold, we're all on board with that. But you will have considerable pushback. As Joe just outlined, there's a number of large primes. There's even smaller companies, too, that will really push back on this. And one effort that I'm involved in now, I chair the Small Business Committee in the Senate, is the reform around the Small Business Innovation Research programs. So what we have found with SBIR is that there are all of these applications that come in for this program, and there's roughly about 25 of the award applicants that make up about 0.5% of the overall applicants, and yet they get 18% of the dollars. So it comes out to about $92 million per awardee. because they continually apply and get granted access to the SBIR program. And it's all they're doing is lining their pockets with government money. What we have found is that those companies, those small businesses that are getting $92 million, these small companies have fewer patents, they have fewer sales, and they have less commercialization than the other companies that just might get a one-off application, an award through the program. So what the Government Accountability Office calls these, they're SBIR mills. Literally, they are just applying for these programs to get money, not to actually produce anything that makes DoD stronger or more efficient. So we have got to break that, and that's what we intend to do with the, I'm actually introducing this act today. It's called the Innovate Act, and it is, again, reforming the SBIR program and making sure that greater access will come to brilliant minds all across America, not just on the coast, but middle America, where I come from as well.
As a journalist, I appreciate the breaking news with that announcement.
Innovate Act.
All of this takes me back to, and you see it with the, established defense primes, talked about it, shipbuilding, you guys just mentioned, I know President Trump talked about it in his address last night, maybe arguably one of the most acute examples of it, but the defense industrial base. And the fact that when, even if whether you're a new company, whether you're an established company, even if you've crossed so-called valley of death and you've moved to a program of record, whatever you want to, however you want to frame it, then you have to ramp production, and that's hard because we don't necessarily have a resilient supply base, a supply chain. Joe, I want to get your thoughts on this, starting with you, because one of the things I see happening with some of these newer companies is not only are they taking on more risk and maybe adopting different business models than we've seen in the past, but they're also helping to maybe fund or create new supply chains in the process. And so I wonder what that means for a stronger defense industrial base.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's obviously a huge gap in the country, and this is very scary versus China, right? China makes over 200 times the amount of ships we do. You look at Tesla, look at SpaceX, they actually brought their supply chains mostly in-house, and they figured out how to do it. And so I think there's a lot of talent from there that have now gone on to a bunch of other companies and that are really seeding this new space. And so Saronic, which announced their $600 million raise last week, we helped start that 3 years ago. It's raised almost $1 billion in total now. It's delivering hundreds of ships to the Navy already, teaching the Navy how to use AI for autonomous weaponized vessels. And what's really cool is because of this moment, there's optimism that the government is going to allow competition to win. It's going to allow the best ideas to win. And so you have all of the biggest investors in America stepping up and making these bets, like $600 million from the private sector. That's a very large check for us to all write together. It's groups like General Catalyst and Andreessen Horowitz and other funds that are the large funds in my sector. And the bet is that if this is the best, it's going to win. It's going to be allowed to win. And that right now it feels like that's the case. The people coming in to run the Navy, to run the Army, to run the Air Force, like they are open to competition. That Secretary Hegseth has said very clearly he wants to have free competition. Like when I come to DC, I'm not coming here like a prime to try to like lock down my program. I'm coming here to say, please allow me to compete. Please allow my new things to compete. And if they compete, please allow them to win. Don't make it what's been the last 20 years that if we compete and we crush the other groups and we're obviously better, then we get like 5% and then they get 90%, because that is how our defense industrial complex has worked for the last 30 years. And there's a lot of optimism that's going to change. And there's also a lot of optimism because of what's happened with AI and because of what's happened with how America has the best innovation sector in the world. Like these new companies are way ahead. They aren't just like sort of better, they're way ahead of the primes in a bunch of these areas. And because of that, we feel that with fair competition, we're going to be able to do it. And that's bringing the investment. So it's not that you need like lots of government money to invest in stuff we're doing. We just need to be allowed to capture the revenue that already exists if we're the best, and that's leading to some real optimism right now.
Senator Ernst, I want to get your thoughts on this, especially given the fact that we have seen tariffs leveled in the last couple of days. not just on Canada and Mexico, but also another 10% on China. And one of the things that's happened is you've seen these retaliatory tariffs and actions take place, including from China, 25 additional firms being added to the so-called entity list. Critical minerals all of a sudden became a Main Street topic last year with what we saw with a meeting with President Trump and President Zelensky of Ukraine. How does it get to what is needed from a national security standpoint? What can be done to stand up this domestic, homegrown supply chain, and how quickly it can be done?
Well, I think that's exactly what we are seeing. And regardless of how you feel on tariffs, it is a tool in the toolbox. And President Trump has stated unequivocally that he is going to exercise his use of that particular tool. And what we have seen by him in placing tariffs, whether it's Canada, Mexico, you name it, China, he is forcing a discussion amongst friends and adversaries on how we develop within the United States, our own businesses, our own stream of resources necessary to support our national defense, maybe greater reliance in some cases on our friends and allies. But that discussion is being had. And the fact that we have resources available to us today in the United States of America that have been put on hold because of permitting processes that have taken 10 to 20 years. I mean, for heaven's sakes, just ask Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska. I swear Alaska must have everything we need, the way Dan talks. But he talks about the minerals, the rare earths that are available in Alaska that are yet to be tapped. And another part of this is the fact that even if we are capable of mining the resources necessary in the United States, we are still shipping all of that to China for refining. It gets shipped over there, refined, and then shipped on back. Why are we relying on our number one adversary to do the refining of everything that we need for technology in the national defense space? So not only do we have to solve the permitting and the mining here in the United States, we have to have the refining capabilities as well.
Yeah, the environmental rules make it so expensive that none of us want to do it.
Exactly.
Because you can get it cheaper elsewhere. So either you got to use a tariff or change the rules or both.
Exactly. So a tool in the toolbox.
Oh, I feel like we've just scratched the surface. We have about 5 minutes left, so I want to open it up to the room and see if we have any questions. Yes, sir.
For Senator Ernst, how is SAS thinking now of incorporating DOGE findings today or in the coming weeks into the NDAA process as you kind of look to mark up?
Well, I think it's greater scrutiny of the programs that we have in place. So DOGE in particular, number one, is making sure that we get an audit of DOD. And I've pressed very hard against Secretary Hegseth during the nominations process. He did say he would support an audit and make sure that it is a clean audit as required by law by 2028. So we have to do that. But in order to do that, we have to make sure that we have the technology in place to get that audit. And we can use new AI technology to audit DOD. That will be very, very helpful. Second is eliminating a lot of the DEI initiatives. They've already done that. That's going to save us billions of dollars out at DOD ongoing every single year. Eliminating the programs, like the U.S. Navy has funded research on puppy personalities. Are you kidding me? The Air Force spent money on research to do like telepathic, it's craziness. So instead of spending those dollars on this weird research, let's make sure that we're spending dollars on new and emerging technologies that can benefit the warfighter and those of us that supported the warfighters. So I think there's a lot that we can do at DOD. There are so many areas of savings that we can dive into there. But the audit, we've got to know where the dollars have gone before we can know how to eliminate the unnecessary spending.
Did I see another hand? Yes.
Hey, this is a general question for the panel. I really appreciate the conversations about bringing the private sector further into Washington and into the defense acquisition process. Coming from a smaller company that's not funded by these large, expansive funds that are coming out of, the tech beach. I live in LA. It's a really exciting place to be. But coming from a smaller company, I'm really curious what you believe we can do to prevent the Palantirs, Andurils, SpaceX from becoming the new defense primes and pushing everyone else out of the market, pushing us to the point where we can't overcome the valley of death.
So the thing, I'll take that. Obviously, I'm tied to a lot of those companies. If you look right now at the revenue that all three of those make, and they're very exciting and they're very, very highly, but it's actually a very, very, very tiny piece of the revenue. And so this is really a question more for 10 or 20 years from now. If they're successful over the next 10 or 20 years, what can you do? And I think there's a few things. First of all, I think you have to keep much more clear open competition. So the way it works right now is, when we bought a pistol 100 years ago, you'd have a one-pager, you'd have a competition, you choose the best pistol. When you buy a pistol today, you have 380 pages, and you spend 10 years, and it's like 700. Yeah, you know better than me. So it's like the processes have to be transparent and open and fair. And if Anduril and Palantir are going to have the best product and they're going to win, I think that's fair. But if they're going to win by doing what the primes do, which is to make the 790 pages that they lobby for, and then they hide behind the ball and they do all these other things, I think our number one thing is spending efficiently to deter our enemies. But you have to keep the processes fair. And then what happened with those other big primes is they kind of became bureaucratic. They became like the government. They basically just they captured it and became an arm of it. I think it is really important. And the senator might have other opinions on how to do this, but I don't think you constantly want everyone from all these companies going in and out and running everything. I think that's actually not great, and that's how it works right now. So I think we need some reform there, but I might be in the minority on that one.
I think, just as I outlined as well with the SBIR program, it was trending that direction, and we've got to get it back to its original mission set of when it was put into law in 1982. Okay, we need to focus on small businesses and give them the opportunity to showcase what they are bringing to the table. So I'm a gal of the future. I do think the future fight is going to be driven by software. I think new emerging technologies are going to be really important and dominate tomorrow's future fight. I would also say there's still space left for those of us that believe in the basics. So I am an old soldier, and I am a steel sights girl, and grew up on a map and compass. And I still think we have room for the basics out there, but software and technology will drive us in the future.
I think we have time for one more. Yes.
Teresa Marr, Inside Defense. We're talking about, in the end, even if we do finally get to the domestic mining, we push it back to the refining, the processing goes back to adversarial nations. So how do you suppose we incentivize, defense contracts or at least private sector mobilization on that?
Well, I think it's the just reforming the permitting process, because I think there is a desire to do that refining process here in the United States, but the environmental standards in so many different areas will be prohibitive of any sort of refining opportunities. And so there are a lot of companies out there that would love the ability to not only mine in the United States, name XYZ state, but then have the refining capabilities right there so the transport costs aren't added in. So there is opportunity, but we really do have to look at what are the environmental standards, what are the permitting standards, and how can we make refining and mining safe and acceptable to the American public, and then foster the dollars to support that. There are companies that will do that.
If I just say one thing on that too, I think this is an area where I hope a lot of Democrats would agree a tariff is appropriate, because if we decide we do want to have higher environmental standards, we just had our sixth child at home. I have a lot of little girls at home. I want them to live in a world without all these refining things, messing up all of our air and water. Now, if we are going to have higher standards, and the other people are lower standards, we should make them pay for that, and that way we can still have it here. So this is the exact place where tariffs, to me, make a lot of sense that we need to think about.
Perfect.
All right. I think we're going to leave the conversation there, Senator Ernst and Joe Lonsdale. Thank you both.
Thank
for being
you
on stage.
so much.